Welkom bij het digitaal Fair Fashion Fest. En deze week heb ik tijdens het Fair Fashion Fest gesprekken met internationale sprekers. Iedere dag staat er wel een internationale spreker op het programma. And today, my guest is Sarah Ditty of Fashion Revolution. Hi, Sarah. Who are you and what do you? How do we have to introduce you? What is the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Ditty. I am based in London and I am the Global Policy Director at Fashion Revolution. Fashion Revolution is a movement, grassroots, and I would say consumer-led movement with teams in over 90 countries. And we're campaigning for a fashion industry that values people and the planet over profit and growth. And we have a special focus on advocating for greater transparency in the global fashion supply chain.
That is exactly what we are trying to do as well with the Fair Fashion Fest here in Ghent, Belgium, of course. How long has the Fashion Revolution movement been going on for now? Is it recently or is it a couple of years already?
Yeah, we were launched in the summer of 2013. So we were actually founded as a response to the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh. I'm sure most of you will remember, there was this big building in Dhaka which collapsed and had 5 garment factories operating in it who were making clothes for, big name brands we'd find on our shopping street or shopping malls. And we really wanted to take the opportunity where that story was firmly in the kind of public sphere, it was being covered a lot in the media, and use that to try and drive change a lot faster than we had seen over the last kind of 20-25 years of corporate social responsibility schemes that wasn't really changing the conversation and wasn't really driving any sort of meaningful, systemic, positive impacts for the people who make our clothes.
Can I say, and I don't want to sound disrespectful, especially not to the chaos that happened in Bangladesh, but never waste a good crisis on this one. And that the Fashion Revolution, the movement, Fashion Revolution Week at the end of April, which is normally also the timing that we organize at Fair Fashion Fest, of course, because we have a connection with that Fashion Revolution movement in that time. Never waste a good crisis. I mean, this is the moment to push through, and that was the initiative of the Fashion Revolution, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that especially then this was true, and this is still true now. News cycles they move so quickly, and I think we really wanted to make sure that this terrible, it was one of the largest industrial disasters in history. And so many of the people who died were young women making the clothes that young women predominantly buy. Yes. And we just really wanted to make sure that it wasn't just another news cycle and that people didn't quickly forget it after, a week or 2 weeks of it not being in the news, and that we used it as a moment to in a way honor the victims by trying to ensure that some positive change was driven out of it. It was emanating from the terrible situation. And that's why we started Fashion Revolution Day on the anniversary of the Rana Plaza factory collapse. So the first one was the first anniversary of Rana Plaza as a moment to make sure that everyone remembered that this incident had happened, honored the victims, and to call for, wide sweeping systemic change across the whole global fashion industry.
Absolutely. And it's a success. I think Fashion Revolution is a term that is well known within the circles of people who are concerned about that, but also broader than that. I think a general public already knows that there's a yearly remembrance of the Rana Plaza accident and that it's called Fashion Revolution. But how do we emphasize this kind of work? And I know you've been working, for example, on a fashion transparency index. What is that kind of index exactly?
Yeah, sure. So that's one tool that we created in an effort to it's basically a mechanism to try and pressure brands, like the major brands, into being more transparent about their business practices and their supply chains. So, you know, one of the things we saw happen as a result of Rana Plaza was that a lot of brands whose clothing labels were found in the rubble of Rana Plaza did not even know that their clothes were being made there. So, you know, for us, it was like, wow, there's a real lack of traceability and transparency here, which is literally costing people's lives. So we created the index. I think we also had a lot of questions from our community that we were starting to really galvanize on these issues. Like, okay, so what information should we be looking for? Like, what information is meaningful that these big brands could be disclosing that we can use to drive change, either as consumers or, you know, as investors or as journalists or, you know, for other worker rights and environmental groups to make use of that information. So we created the index as a tool to basically pressure and, I guess, incentivize the big brands to start disclosing more information about who their suppliers are, about what their social and environmental policies are, how they put those policies into action, and then what are the results of those actions that they're taking to improve social and environmental issues in the industry. And the reason why we have, I guess, focused on those big brands in the index is because they have the most negative social and environmental impacts. You know, they've created all of these systemic issues, and therefore they have the responsibility and should be accountable to addressing those negative impacts and changing them. And that's, and so since we've been publishing it now for 5 years, and we have seen that the index has contributed or influenced to some of these major brands publishing more information about, you know, what they're doing in the supply chain. And that information then is now being used by worker rights groups, by environmental groups, by trade unions, by investigative journalists to uncover issues that are going on and ultimately remedy them. So we're quite like pleased with the impact it has created, but you know, it's just a very first step towards change, and so much more needs to be done. And there's so many brands who are still completely untransparent and not really seeming to be doing much at all in social and environmental issues.
But you do see progress. You do see big brands moving towards more sustainable fashion.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely taking steps to you know, use more sustainable materials. They are making investments in some areas of you know, labor practices. You know, they're certainly making a lot of pledges around things like living wages, but we are still yet to see more information disclosed about the results of a lot of these activities that they're doing. So, you know, what is the result? What is the impact of their purchasing practices? What is the result of, you know, the things they say they're doing to address climate change? What's the result of their pledges on, you know, paying workers a living wage? Those things are still missing, but we are starting to see more progress, especially on, you know, when we started researching brands 5 years ago, only really a handful of them were disclosing who their suppliers are. And now, you know, 40% of the brands we review are publishing a supplier list. And I think we've counted over 200 big brands who are publishing their supplier list now, which is super helpful for trade unions and super helpful for worker rights groups who are trying to, you know, do the work on the ground of addressing these issues.
Public pressure works, Sarah?
Public pressure works. It works, definitely.
That's a good thing. Because I do want to emphasize also the fact that at the timing of the accident in Rana Plaza and some brands were found there, those brands truly didn't know that their products were made at Rana Plaza at that point. I mean, it's almost a little bit the same as a individual consumer who's buying something but doesn't know the supply chain or the trace of where it's coming from, where it's produced. I do like to say that we don't have to feel guilty about that, but we should be very aware about the fact that what we buy, but also as a company, what you produce or what your supply chain looks like has an impact on people worldwide. And we have to know and we have to be willing to change that kind of behavior, not only for companies, but also as an individual consumer. Is the Fashion Revolution campaign also aiming at that individual consumer, or are you focused on the companies as such?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all contributing in some way to the issues that persist in fashion's, global
Absolutely.
value chain. And I think that, well, at least I think our view is that everybody has a responsibility and that some actors have greater responsibility than others. Of course, billion-dollar companies have way more responsibility and power to change things in a truly transformative way. So that's one reason why we, focus on the activities and failings and responsibilities and progress of big brands. But we also, know that individual and collective action by citizens and consumers is also absolutely necessary for change. We need both of those things to happen in order to create the kind of change that we need, the transformative change that we really need to see in this industry. So we do focus on trying to help consumers understand the individual changes that they can make, and like what's within their individual power, and how they can join together with others, with a similar mindset to take collective action to try and either, put pressure on the brands they buy from, or, maybe contact their policymakers and advocate for better laws and regulations for this industry. And also just take a look at their own wardrobes and try and change their own relationship with the clothes that they wear, and challenge some of the mindsets that seem to persist and to seem to be really popular around, always following trends, buying things quickly, discarding things quickly, and not really thinking about the not just the impacts, but really the stories of our clothes, like whose hands have they passed through, what were their lives like, how is the environment, how is the environment used to create this product, and how is the environment going to be treated when I wash this product, or when I throw it away, or hopefully not throw it away. Those are the kinds of things that we really try and help consumers feel like they have a sense of, or citizens rather, have a sense of control and ownership, and feel inspired and activated to do something in that way as well.
It's maybe a small step, but there are some fair brands. That's also the fact that we try to emphasize with the Fair Fashion Fest. We have our Fair Fashion Pioneers here in Ghent. We have a lot of shops that offer those kind of brands. It is a small step, but if you pay attention to it, you change a lot for people around the world, also for our planet. I think that's a very important point to make. Sarah?
Absolutely. And 90, oh, sorry, I was just going to say on that point there. Yeah, I was just going to say on that point there, the vast majority of fashion companies in the world are small companies. So while one individual company may not have a huge supply chain, or, a ton of power, a ton of influence, or loads of profits, or all these things, if we have a large number of smaller brands who are trying to do things in a more fair, more ethical, safer, a more environmentally sustainable way, then that, all those companies together has a huge impact. And there are more and more and more of these brands who are trying to do things in a fundamentally different way popping up all the time. Obviously, this year is going to be really hard for small companies because of COVID and because of obviously the associated recession. But it's really exciting to see that there's more brands stepping forward and filling filling this need, and that, you know, cities like Ghent are so supportive of boutiques and shops and brands and designers who are trying to do things in a fundamentally different way. So, and just to flag as well, we have another program that I'm not too involved in at Fashion Revolution called Fashion Open Studio, where we showcase some of these great brands and great designers who are, you know, really trying to apply a different mindset and to do things in a fundamentally more sustainable and more and fairer way.
Cool. You mentioned the C word, Sarah, so I have to pick in on that one. The COVID-19 pandemic, it is having a huge impact on workers worldwide, also in textile production. We've seen orders being canceled by the big brands, which leaves a lot of people, for example, in Bangladesh, but also other countries, without a job, without any living wage. What are the results of the index this year, or how does the COVID-19 pandemic impact the fashion industry, to your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's been devastating for the industry, and particularly for those who are, you know, historically and currently most exploited and marginalized, and who are working in the most precarious conditions within the industry. So this has had, you know, when we went into lockdown in Europe and US and in most places and shops shut, a lot of the major fashion brands, you know, canceled their orders from their suppliers that they had already made, or some of the products had already been made and were waiting to be shipped. And this had a huge impact for suppliers who, you know, who usually, because contracts aren't very fair between brands and suppliers, where brands hold all the kind of negotiating power, suppliers usually pay for upfront costs for materials and for workers' wages. So when they don't get paid for orders, then, you know, who do you think is most impacted? It's the workers who then end up going without wages. So that's what we've seen happen systematically as a result of COVID. And now we've seen, you know, workers in places like Bangladesh and Cambodia, all over the world, to be honest, you know, go without wages, be laid off, maybe be rehired, but rehired in a much more precarious, with much more precarious working conditions. And, you know, and also workers have to go back into the factory without proper PPE or social distancing measures in place. So it's been really, really dire. And I guess my fear is that we kind of have two choices at this stage in the industry. Either we're going to let this moment reverse a lot of the progress that's been made over the last 7 years in particular, or, you know, we're going to really use this as a moment to maybe rewrite some of the rules and rewrite some of the systems going forward. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens.
I was going to ask, which way is it going to go? Because do you believe this is the systemic change that will be that will have a start with COVID-19? Because in first lockdown this spring, and even now we see a lot of people going for more sustainable, thinking about their purchasing power, thinking about the things they buy, going local, buying things locally, also going into the trend of sustainable and fair and ethical. But it could well be, even well be, a setback in the battle and in the fight that we've been fighting for the last couple of years. It could also mean that people are going into their own, looking at their own wallet and going for the cheapest way to buy things and not thinking about sustainable future anymore. We are at a crossroad, and I don't know which way it will go, but do you have any thoughts about that? Do you think it will flip the one or the other side?
I think it's too early to tell.
Okay.
I know that's probably not the answer you want to hear.
No, I think it's an honest answer.
I think it's too early to tell. You know, well, in the UK anyway, we're still in, I think you are probably in Belgium too, still in lockdown or back into lockdown. You know, the second wave is kind of happening in all over Europe, and obviously the US is a major consumption market, and that continues to, have an unprecedented number of COVID cases every day. So I think it's still a little bit too early to tell. And, I do see that it is, and data is starting to suggest that it is impacting people's consumption patterns. People are consuming less. What big brands choose to do going forward, I think, is going to be quite telling. And I personally feel quite skeptical about the way that big brands have behaved over the past 9 months, and the actions that they'll continue to take going forward in response to COVID. So there, I feel a little bit skeptical. I feel more hopeful about perhaps what a lot of consumers will do, take moments to reevaluate what they really need. I think it's probably going to fundamentally change the way that people shop going forward. And I think potentially in some good ways and maybe in some other negative ways. Time will tell. But I definitely think that also being forced to shop online means that people are kind of open to other types of brands who maybe don't have a presence on the high street like the big brands do. And I think that could maybe open some doors for some of the smaller brands to maybe find new customers that they were maybe less likely to kind of reach before. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be some really positive changes, and maybe some of the good progress we've made will be overturned as well.
Maybe we will see in the future, but maybe this was the perfect timing to organize a fair fashion fest, although it be a digital one this year. But maybe this was the timing where people are looking for these kind of answers and are looking for more sustainable products, and especially in fashion, they are available, of course. So that
I think the other thing that has been interesting and will be a positive thing going forward is that I think a lot of the kind of buying side of the industry, so the resort shows and the catwalk shows and the big expensive trade shows with a big environmental footprint, are kind of seeming slightly less needed.
Yes.
And I think that's a part of the industry where a lot of positive change for the environment in particular will happen.
Coming back to the Fashion Transparency Index, what are the results of this year, and is there a change that you see within the beginning of the Transparency Index?
Yeah, so we have seen a lot of progress. Unfortunately, the methodology for 2020 was created. I mean, all the research was done before COVID happened.
Yes.
But one of the most relevant sections of the methodology that we focus on is brands' purchasing practices. And we see very disclosure for the past 2 years from brands on their purchasing practices. So, how are they treating suppliers? What sort of last minute changes are they making to orders? Like, how are they ensuring that labor costs are not part of their price negotiations? Those sorts of things. Like, how late are they paying suppliers? How many days? The things that really impact a supplier's ability to plan and avoid cutting corners.
And which have a huge impact, if I may say so, because it may seem one day paying later for a big company doesn't matter that much, but it does mean a whole world of difference for people working in the global south or in countries like Bangladesh or Cambodia. So
absolutely.
It is an important issue.
Yeah, so I think the fact that COVID happened basically right as we were preparing to publish the index was quite interesting. A quite interesting lens to put on the purchasing practice related indicators we already have in the index, and really show just how important that topic is, and just how telling the lack of transparency is for major brands on those indicators. But yeah, I mean, as I said, there is some progress being made by big brands to be more transparent, which has been really useful. As I said, there's been a lot of progress on brands publishing their supplier lists. There has been some, progress on brands publishing their policies, which obviously, is a much easier thing for them to do and much less controversial thing for them to do than publish information about their actual practices and results. But still, publishing those policies means that those policies can be scrutinized. And when, especially like different types of trade unions or worker rights groups can have access to those supplier lists and to those policies, and they can say like, hang on, this is what you say you're doing. We know you're not doing, that's not happening. We know you're not doing that. So what's going on here?
Yeah.
Accountability. It really does like create accountability between what the brand says they care about and says they're doing versus what's actually happening on the ground.
It may seem like a very small step, but it is a very necessary step to get progress within the fashion industry, I presume.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Some of these things do seem kind of maybe small, but they do have bigger impacts than people realize.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so we are seeing some progress. I mean, we're seeing some brands, in the beginning who didn't engage with us at all in the index, starting to engage more and more, and we're, take steps to ensure, or to start disclosing more information about what they do. And when they disclose information, they usually, that's run by their legal teams, so they're not just going to like disclose something that isn't that they don't have some sort of feel like they can claim is somewhat true, although obviously that's not always the case.
No.
Either. There's definitely like a lot of selective disclosure of just the good stuff that happens and not the bad stuff, which we have to continually keep, poking and prodding brands on, because that's where we go into greenwashing.
Yes, and that's why we need movements like the fashion revolution to dig deeper and to see what the real stories are, of course. One final question, Sarah. Why should people, and how maybe is even more important, but why should people get involved in a fashion revolution? Why is this necessary, and why is this more than ever necessary that we get involved in this kind of story?
It's a great question. I think fundamentally, the fashion industry is one of the most, it's one of the most polluting industries for our environment. It's also one of the most exploitative industries there is for people, especially people working in the supply chain, but people working all over the industry. And it's also an incredibly powerful industry, both in terms of its cultural power, but also its commercial power. So, some of the richest people in the world are the predominantly white men who own these billion-dollar fashion companies.
Yep.
And we all, unwittingly in many ways contribute to those negative social and environmental impacts into that, economic inequality that the fashion industry thrives on. So in a way, we all have a responsibility, and we all have the power, through what we buy, through how we vote, through the conversations that we have with our friends and family and peers on social media, or, at home or in school or wherever it is, to make a change in this industry. And making a change in this industry ultimately means making a change in the world that we live in every day.
I couldn't make a better conclusion for this talk than we all have to get involved, because it does mean a difference. It can make a change even with our individual purchasing power, but also in our voting. I think that is also an important one. And also in how we talk about it, what we show, and how we emphasize what we want as a new future and as a sustainable world, I would say.
Yeah. So,
yes,
I was going to say, no, I was just going to say for us, I mean, how we encourage or invite people to get involved in the fashion revolution movement is to, if you use social media, take to social media and ask brands that you buy and love, hashtag who made my clothes, in order to send a signal to them that you care about the people working in their supply chain and that you want to see them become more transparent about the people working in their supply chain. We also have a new hashtag that we launched this year, which is another important question we should be also asking the brands we buy and love, which is what's in my clothes. There's a lot of like hidden toxic chemicals, and there's microplastics, and there's all sorts of kind of terrible things hiding in the way that our clothes are made and processed, that we should be querying as well. So you can use both of those hashtags to kind of get involved in the movement, and obviously to find out more, visit fashionrevolution.org.
Perfect conclusion of a very nice talk with you, Sarah. I hope I could invite you in 2022 when we have another Fashion Fest, and hopefully it will be a physical meeting, and then we can have this conversation once again, hopefully with some progress again made in a couple of years. But it was a real joy to have you here on the screen and have this conversation. Wishing you all the best with the Fashion Revolution movement, and you've got our support, you know that, and hopefully we can meet in the future.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and good luck with the rest of the wonderful program that you have planned.
Thank you, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hoe komen we op lokale schaal tot een geïntegreerde samenwerking?
En dat was allemaal in hennep. Zelfs in de middeleeuwen verplichte